for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you are looking for a copy of all the slides, we'll be sending a copy through email after the presentation is complete. The last item is that we will have a brief survey that pops up after the webinar ends. It only takes about 30 seconds to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great information on how we can continue to make our webinars better for you. Now to give you a brief intro of our speaker. Jerry Lifelli is the Executive Sales and Education Services Manager for NCS and has been with the company since 1995. Prior to coming to NCS, Jerry was a corporate credit manager in the manufacturing industry for 10 years, during which time he gained a very thorough hands-on experience with both UCC filings and mechanics lien filings. Jerry consults with companies daily and has spoken to groups nationwide about Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, the revised Article 9 Model Act, the nuances of construction credit, and the benefits of selling through secure transactions. His presentations cover not only the legal protections brought about the mechanics lien and UCC filing processes, but also practical solutions of how and when to use these tools. With more than 45 years of experience, NCS is the industry leader in assisting credit professionals in securing their accounts receivable through mechanics liens and UCC filings in all 50 states and in all provinces in Canada. Jerry, I pass the presentation to you now.
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. Thank you to all the people of the Federation for having me, and I appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for sitting in, too. We appreciate you spending some time on the educational programs that are put on here. But my name is Jerry Bailey. My company, NCS, specializes in secure transactions. And by secure transactions, essentially what we try and do is help trade creditors take some sort of collateral against credit lines that they extend. Normally that's accomplished through either UCC filings or what we're going to talk about today, the mechanics lien filing process. Here's our agenda. We'll go through all of those things. Construction credit, I think, is much more difficult than, let's say, normal credit. So we'll talk about the things we need to do. And we're going to talk about, in a general overview, of the things you need to do to manage your mechanics lien rights. And then we will also drill into the upcoming changes to the Pennsylvania lien laws also. So there's our agenda, but again, you know, if you have questions, make sure you get them out to us and we'll answer them by the end, or even if you think of them afterwards, you can email Roxanne or myself and we'll get answers to whatever questions you have. But the idea is to get some sort of collateral pledge. Now, again, it's done through UCC filings or mechanics lien filings. The collateral is different. UCC filings are one way we can get collateral pledged against the credit line that we extend. And the way we do that is we have the customer pledge their personal property to us. What is their personal property? Well, that's their assets, their inventory, their equipment, proceeds they get for selling the inventory, their accounts receivable, cash, all of those things. We can have all of that pledged to us through a UCC filing. Now, that's one way, not our focus today. Our focus today is on the other side, real property. Real property means we've improved a piece of real property, a building. And the theory here is really simple. We've improved this piece of property. The owner should not retain the benefit of that improvement unless they pay for it. And if they don't, then we can take collateral or security against that piece of property to whatever extent we've improved that piece of property. That's accomplished through the mechanics lien filing process. Now, really, there's three ways that you can attach assets when you have not been paid. There's those two ways, and then the third way is to sue, to litigate and get a judgment, and then go through your post-judgment remedies to try and garnish accounts and all the rest of those things. Now, of those three ways, obviously litigation is far and away the most expensive and the most time-consuming. It's not a very efficient vehicle to give you rights. Again, it can take a long time and it can cost a lot of money, and you still may not get anything even after you have a judgment. We've all probably gone through that, where you get a judgment, you still didn't get anything. And that's kind of really why these secure transactions were created. They were created to try and give us some sort of a mid-ground to establish priority of creditors' claims, short of all of us running to the courthouse and suing one another. So that was their goal. The goal really was to make credit cheaper. They wanted to make the credit transaction cheaper, and they wanted to make it cheaper for the creditor as well as the debtor. And the logic was, if we make it cheaper, then more companies will offer to sell things on open terms, and therefore more companies will buy things on open terms. That means more companies are buying things and will drive our economy and allow it to flourish. it's worked pretty well. If you look at countries that have secured lending laws, they tend to have GDPs that are at least 30% higher than countries that do not. So that's kind of why this idea was created, and what the goal of it. Now, if you pay attention to banking, you can look in the banks and the things that they do, and you recognize pretty clearly how they associate the value of lending with collateral or security versus lending without collateral or security. Contrast the interest rates and the things that they do. Look at mortgages and look at credit cards. What's the difference? I mean, mortgages, I think, are 3.5 now, versus credit cards are 14, 18, 24, 28%. Well, why? Why is one 3.5 and the other is 5 times that? Well, the answer comes back to collateral, security. The bank has a piece of property to repossess in a mortgage situation. They can sell that piece of property and come out whole, maybe even profitable. Credit cards, on the other side, they're going down for the entire balance. They don't care, though, because they're still very profitable because of the extreme interest charges that the majority of people using those credit cards are paying. But you see pretty clearly how banks associate the value of collateralized lending versus non-collateralized lending. Banks are pretty good about lending. They do a lot of it. They do more of it than we do. They lend more often at larger dollars. They're pretty good at lending. If this seems to make sense for them, probably would be a good idea for us to think about it somewhere in our business too. And as we do these, normally I'm 90% of the time I'm talking to credit and financial people. However, sometimes I'm talking to their salespeople. In this, in the trade credit world, you might be capturing job information where you're asking your salespeople to go out and capture the job information. We're now, these are credit policies. Our credit policies are going to affect our salespeople, no doubt about it. If we came out tomorrow and said we're only selling on credit cards, well, and all of our competitors were selling on open terms, well, then that's an example where our credit policies are fairly negatively affecting sales. Now, if we came out tomorrow and said, look, we figured out how to protect our lien rights, some of these projects we just could not entertain before, we now can, well, then that would be a way where our credit policies positively affect sales. So, we may be asking sales, but we involving them, and again, our credit policies are affecting them. They're financially driven. We want to make sure that they understand why we're doing this. Sales has a level of expertise, no doubt. They go out and they get these commitments from companies to buy your goods or services. That's not easy to do. If there wasn't any sales, there'd be no need for us in credit. So their job is not easy. They hear a lot more no's than they hear yeses. But, we want to make sure they understand this is why we're doing this. Everybody brings value to the table. I picked a pretty moderate write-off, $15,000. If you're selling on a 20% margin, that means your salespeople have to go sell $75,000 worth of your goods in order to recover the 15 grand that you've written off. And down the line you go, 10%, they're going to sell over $150,000 worth of your goods or services to recover the 15 grand that you've written off. So one, it helps them understand you got to work a lot harder when we suffer these write-offs. The other thing I think it's important to help them understand is, where else do write-offs affect us? I mean, they go straight to the bottom line. They cause us to be not as profitable, but they affect us in pricing too. I mean, how do we formulate our pricing? Well, it's largely based on our costs. Well, what are write-offs? Write-offs are nothing more than additional costs. The more of them we have, the more time or the higher prices we'll have to charge in order to maintain the same profit margins for those same products. So the more we can minimize write-offs, we can contain our prices. If we're selling at lower prices, our salespeople will be more competitive in the marketplace. Ultimately, that's what they want to be. Now, we'll talk about this also. How do we use this? What are the steps in this process? What happens if we're unpaid, liens, bond claims? All of those things provide wonderful protections for us. But really, I think our goal is to just make sure we get paid. I don't want to spend money with an attorney and file a lien. I want to get paid. So one of the first things I learned in credit was the problem with most debtors is not they don't have any money. The problem with most debtors is they have $10,000, but they owe 15 people $1,000 a piece. The goal is to make sure that I'm one of the 10 of the 15. How do I do that? Well, lots of different ways. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe my product is just too important to their business. Maybe it's the fact that the state requires a preliminary notice to protect your lien rights, and I have served mine, and the other people that my customer owes money to have not. Historically, that means I'm going to get paid. This process of doing your preliminary notices consistently when they're required will affect your DSO. We have a case study done by one of our clients where they dropped their DSO by over 30% by putting in a consistent preliminary notice filing process. That's a massive difference to your working capital, your ability to be profitable too. So it is a proven strategy. It is going to help you and affect those sorts of things, your working capital. But I mean, here's one of the differences and why construction credit is so different. One, you folks hear this 10 times a day easily. I can't pay you until I get paid. If I'm talking to the corporate credit manager at US Foods, they have no idea what this statement is about, and yet it is a way of your life. If you're selling to a sub, normally the subs aren't going to pay anything until they've gotten paid by the general. The generals don't pay anything until they've gotten paid by the owner. So if we're a third-tier material provider, we're kind of stuck with pay when paid. Here's some other things that are a little bit different about the construction industry too. First of all, the DSOs are much longer. Again, if I'm a material supplier and I'm invoicing a subcontractor and they're invoicing a general contractor who's invoicing the owner, and an architect has to approve it, maybe it's a school project and the school board only meets on the first Tuesday of every month, that's a lot of people handling my money. So by the time my invoice goes up the line and comes back down the line, I'm not getting paid in 35 or 45 days. It's going to be 60 or more. And we also understand just because I have a purchase order for $100,000, that doesn't mean I'm getting paid $100,000. There's cases where we see the general contractors taking contracts at break even and trying to back charge their way into profitability. And again, everything is low bid. You know, the person with the least amount of money, the least amount of profit in the project is awarded the contract. So the economics are very skinny right off the top. And that's really why the lien process was created. A lot of those, really was created to allow us to pull other assets into the equation when we're looking to consider extending these very large lines of credit. The mechanics lien filing process was created a long time ago, not far from you folks. The mechanics lien filing process, the first statute was put in place in 1791 in Maryland. And understand the financial landscape of the country at that point in time. We had nothing but land. You know, we were building a new nation's capital. Building was the future of the country. But there was a lot of apprehension by people when they were selling their goods into a situation where they're going to become permanently incorporated into a piece of property. If I don't get paid, what do I do? You know, how do I get my stuff back? Why do I want to get my stuff back? And it costs me too much. And that's really why the lien filing process was created. Thomas Jefferson was one of the individuals who was really instrumental in pushing the process ahead. He recognized, again, that building was the future of the country, and we had to take those apprehensions away. This process was always created to promote commerce and make it easier for us to sell our goods on open terms. Now, construction credit, another reason I think it's very different is, one, we're very frequently asked to extend credit lines to our customer, and those credit lines can be much larger than the financial wherewithal of the customer would allow. If we go through any normal credit decision-making evaluation, the conclusion is no, there's no way I can give them this huge credit line. It's 5 or 10 times their net worth. But the construction industry is built upon us finding ways to say yes. And that's why the lien process was created, to allow us to tie back to the property that we've improved, maybe a performance and payment bond out there. Now, the right to file a lien against a piece of property, not everyone can do this. The right to file a lien against a property is somewhat protected. There are criteria we have to meet. Our government doesn't want just anybody filing liens against properties and forcing the owner to sell them unless they ultimately have that right, meaning they've improved that property and have not been paid for that improvement. So it's a very protected right to file this lien. We must meet certain criteria. Let's figure out who the lien filing eligible people are. Now, any given project will start out with an owner, and an owner who's going to either build a brand new building or refurbish an existing one. And when the owner does that, he may have the capital to do it himself, but in all probability not. Typically, he's going to go to a bank and secure some sort of financing, a construction loan, to do this improvement or build this new building. Now, when he goes to this, he already has a scope of work to be performed. He's got a set of shop drawings. They know what the scope of work is going to be. So we know what the scope of work is. We now have the financing in place. We put it out for bid. Hopefully we get 3, 4, 5 competitive bids, and typically the owner selects whoever is the lowest bidder. So we now have a scope of work to be performed. We have a fixed sum, lump sum of monies to be paid for this improvement. Now, once that general is in place, they go out and solicit different subcontractors to assist them with various trades. And once those subcontractors are in place, they go out and solicit various material and service providers to assist them with whatever trades they have to provide. Once this has filled in, we're probably looking at the realm of people who are eligible to file mechanics liens. Our slide tells us claims filed below that line might be questionable. Again, there are criteria. Now, this is a pretty good rule of thumb to use. We're going to talk again about the things we need to pay attention to as we move across the United States. This is a pretty good rule. Now, from one state to the next, there might be some variations. Sometimes public is different from private. By and large, this is a good rule of thumb to use when you're trying to consider if you have lien rights or not. So what are some of the criteria we spoke of? Well, one, we need to be within 3 tiers of the owner. That means we start out the owner, the general contractor is the first tier, sub is the second tier, material supplier is the third tier. So we should be within 3 tiers of the owner. Secondly, if we're providing tangible goods, they should be permanently affixed into that piece of property. They can't be freestanding. And lastly, we shouldn't be a supplier to a supplier. If we are selling goods, we should either be affixing them into the property ourselves, or we should be selling them to a party who is affixing them into the property. If we are a supplier to a supplier, and we are only selling goods to our customer who is merely reselling those goods, then we're a supplier to a supplier, and we probably do not have lien rights. So that's kind of the people who have the ability to file liens. Now, again, one state to the next is a little bit different. If you have specific scenarios that you want to talk about, don't hesitate to give me a call. We can talk over, yeah, you're a supplier to the general. Are you good? What state is it? Public, private? And I can give you better answers. But that's a pretty good rule of thumb to determine, do I have lien rights? Now, as we look at this, though, this also kind of tells us something else about the lien process. In a normal business-to-business transaction, I'm going to invoice my customer and they're going to pay me in 35 or 45 days. There's 2 parties involved with the transaction. When you look at this, if I'm a material supplier, I'm going to invoice the sub. Sub is going to invoice the general. General is going to invoice the owner. I need to make sure there's funding approved and established by the bank. I want to make sure I can tie it into the property. I can tie into a performance and payment bond. So as you can see, there's a lot more people involved with when and how much I'm going to get paid. So that becomes the next thing about construction credit. That's a link. That is a payment chain that is only as strong as the weakest link. So if any of those parties can cause a bottleneck or stop my money from making it down the line, I need to know who they are. So if I'm selling to the sub and the sub tells me he hasn't been paid by the general, I want to know who the general is so I can contact them to find out, are there any issues? Is there anything I can do? So as you can see, there's a lot more going on. Maybe I've been dealing with a subcontractor for 10 years, and they're fantastic. We have a great relationship. Their credit rating is quad A. But they're selling to a general contractor, and that general contractor happens to be on 10 different projects right now, and of the 10 different projects, the bank has pulled financing on 2 of them. Well, it's unrealistic to think that that problem is not going to become a problem for me. It is. That cuts into the GC's cash flow, and that's going to affect the project that I'm on. So I have to factor all of those things in. I can't look just at my customer and make this decision. I have to identify all these other people and make sure I'm comfortable with them and their performance. So again, that's why the lien filing process was created. Now, the lien filing process, as you look across the United States, by and large, is a three-step process. When we look at the changes that Pennsylvania is putting through, they are now going to be a three-step process too. It's not a process where I do my work and I sit back and see if I get paid, and if I do not, then I go file a lien against the property. Most of the states, there is something required before I file that lien that I must do to preserve my right to file that lien. So, you know, there's a preliminary notice generally required. The second step then would be the actual lien, and the third step would be foreclosure against the property to force the sale of that property. But each of these steps are prerequisites that I have to take to allow myself to take the next step. If there's a preliminary notice required in the state and I don't serve it in a timely fashion, in all probability, I have lost my right to file the lien. And then, of course, I can't actually file suit against the lien if I don't file the lien. Normally, the states tell you have so many days from first furnishing to serve your notice, and then you're good. You've preserved your lien rights, and then they move on to last furnishing, so many days from last furnishing, labor or material, that you have to file the lien, and if you don't do it within that time period, you've lost that right. And then the statute will further tell you have so many months or so many years to sue to force the foreclosure of the property, or you lose that right. But again, these are state laws. They're all state specific. So the things that we will learn about Pennsylvania don't do us any good in New Jersey. They don't help us in Ohio. And they're vastly different too. There doesn't seem to be any continuity from one state to the next. So we really have to understand, this is a private job in Ohio, what do I need to do? This is a public job in Michigan, what do I need to do? But this preliminary notice is generally required on most of the states. It is basically a notice that we're going to send to various parties on the ladder of supply. Typically, we start with the owner. It's a prerequisite to filing our lien claim, which normally we have to do 20 days after first furnishing, 30 days after first furnishing, 45 days after first furnishing. But it's this step required that we must send out to the owner. And basically what it is it's a way for the owner of the property to identify anybody that could possibly file a lien against their property. Because the owner does not want liens filed against the property. They want the work to get done. They want to pay the general. General pays the subs. Everybody moves along, and the owner takes ownership of the property. Sometimes there's some glitches in that process, though. So, you know, as we looked at our diagram, you can see all of those people have the right and the ability to file a lien against that property. The problem is the owner might know the general contractor, and he might know a couple of the subcontractors, but he doesn't know all of them, and he doesn't know a good deal of the third-tier material and service providers. And yet, again, they all can file liens against his property. So the theory is real simple. We're supposed to send our notice out to the owner as soon as we do any work on the property. We identify ourselves. Hey, here you go. I provided windows. I provided drywall. I provided electrical. Here you go, owner. And basically, the owner then takes all these notices and builds a roster of potential lien claimants, and he builds a system of checks and balances in to make sure that liens don't get filed. And that system of checks and balances is, he just, every month when he gets a draw from the general, he goes through and matches up and says, okay, I got a preliminary notice from these window people. Did I get a waiver of lien from them? Yes, I did. Looks like they've been paid. Good to go. I got a preliminary notice from these drywall people. Did I get a waiver of lien? Yes, I did. Looks like they've been paid. Good to go. And he matches up and says, okay, everybody I've gotten a preliminary notice from, I've gotten a waiver of lien from, looks good. Everybody's been paid. Here you go, Mr. GC. Here is your check. But if we don't serve our notice, now we're not on that roster, and we can slip through the cracks. The owner doesn't know we're out there. So he doesn't know to get waivers of lien rights from us, and we can end up filing a lien against his property, again, which he does not want. In some states, he can actually suffer double jeopardy. We looked at that contract and said that's a lump sum, a fixed sum he's got to pay for this work. In some states, he can pay that entire sum out, and we file a claim of lien against the property, and he has to make good on our lien as well. So he goes over and above the lump sum. Obviously, the owner does not want to do that. So that's why this notice process was created, to identify ourselves, make sure we get our money from the owner. Now, the notice formats are very different too. The time frames you have to do these in is very different from one state to the next. The formats are all very different too. Each state seems to have their own format that you must serve the notice in. If you do not use that format, then you have probably lost your lien rights. On the left, you see California preliminary notice. In the state of California, we have to do our preliminary notice within 20 days of first furnishing material or labor to the project. That is very quick. Our money is not even out of the current column yet, and yet there's something we have to do to preserve our right to file the mechanics lien. There's probably a third of the states that we call the quick whistle states, where you have to do this notice in less than terms. And to me, I don't think anybody gets paid in less than 45 days in the construction industry. So in less than 45 days. Michigan and Ohio are 20 and 21. Pennsylvania is going to be 45 from first. Florida is 30 from first. Georgia is 45 from first. So no, I'm sorry, backwards. Florida is 45 from first. Georgia is 30 from first. So essentially what these states are telling you is you really can't make a reactive decision about, yeah, I did my work and I'm not paid. They're telling you, you have to think about what you're going to do at the point in time when you get your subcontract or your purchase order. You're going to make the call then. Am I going to serve my notice or not? Because if you wait, there's a good chance you've missed a step that's required to preserve that right to file your lien. You do not want that to happen. So we want to serve this notice. We want to make sure it's done accurately too. You know, depending on how much money we have riding, there's all sorts of potholes that people have stepped in by filing notices. I saw one in Minnesota the other day that people did not use the correct font size, and the courts threw the lien out. It was for $24,000. We want to make sure we have the exact owner, the correct legal party, the correct general contractor, the legal party. Because if not, we can be challenged. If I file a lien against the property, obviously people would like to have that lien removed. Like the owner would like to have that lien removed. Other lien holders would like to have my lien removed. If they can have mine thrown out, then that's more money for them. So this notice becomes very important now. Most of the time, serving that notice will get us paid. The times it doesn't, though, we need it to be done correctly and accurately, exact legal information, because if we go to court, that's the foundation block we're going to have to build our case on. Did we notify timely? Do we have proof of delivery? Did we notify in the correct format, the correct service manner, to the correct parties? So we want to make sure that we're done correctly, depending on how much we have riding. Now, obviously, that introduces us to, in normal credit, we go get a credit application signed by our customer. It has all sorts of good information for us, like where they bank, references that we can call, great information. But in construction, every project is different. We looked at that ladder of supply, and that's going to change on every project. I'm selling to this subcontractor, but on this project, it's a different general, and they all factor in to my ability to get paid. So it introduces us to another thing about construction credit. There's just more information required. Every job really is its own endeavor, and I have to treat it as its own endeavor. So for construction, really, we're going to create a project credit application for each and every project. Not each and every, but at some point in time, maybe a threshold of $10,000. The project's over 10 grand, 20 grand. It's going to be part of our required process that we have this correct job information, meaning we identify everybody above us in the ladder of supply. Who's the customer? What's their legal name? What's the address? Am I selling to the general contractor or am I selling to the sub? Where is the project? Who's the owner? If there's an awarding authority, who is it? The construction lender is required in some states. General contractor, bonding company. How about the architect? Very good resource. So that's what we're going to do to capture, again, any of those people that could cause us for our payment to be held up or not made altogether. We want to identify them if we need to contact them. So we've served our notice. We've protected our lien rights by filing the notice in a timely manner in the state that it was required. The next step is the mechanics lien. Hopefully we don't have to go here. Sometimes we do, though. We're unpaid. we get to that time frame, usually the states give us an ample time to decide if we're going to get paid or not, or if there is a payment issue. The most common is 90 or 120 days from last furnishing. So it's going to tell us we have so many days from last substantial furnishing material or labor to the project, and if we don't file our lien in time, we have lost that right. So we want to make sure that we know when those deadlines are coming in that given state. If we're unpaid, we file this encumbrance, and this is the encumbrance. The preliminary notice is not a legal encumbrance. It's not recorded. It's not going to impair their ability to get financing. It's not going to affect their Dun & Bradstreet rating. The mechanics lien is different. The mechanics lien is a legal encumbrance against the property. We're going to cloud the title of the property. This is going to gum up the works. We're going to go to the county recorder's office and file this encumbrance against this property. The property probably will not be able to be sold. Nobody wants to buy a property when that property could be foreclosed upon out from under them. The bank would probably not lend more money for any capital improvements. Again, the same reason. The bank doesn't want to lend money into a situation where there is a lien that would be senior to their construction loan. So they're going to be reluctant to lend more money. So this will gum up the works, is this mechanics lien. It's a right given by the states to suppliers of goods or services, to those who have improved that property if we have not been paid. And again, we don't need to be direct with the owner. Claim attaches to the land as well as the buildings and the improvements on that land. Now, this is something to understand too. States view, there's two different arenas we're going to sell into. There is private construction and there is public construction. Private construction means the property is owned by a private operation, a corporation, a partnership, or an individual. And if that's the case, we're going to look to the mechanics lien statutes. The other arena is the public construction. Public means it's owned by some form of government. As you can see there, federal, state, and municipal. If that's the case, we're not going to file a lien against the property. There is going to be a bond put in place for our protection, and we're going to look to that bond for our protection. But if it's the mechanics lien filing process, we need to understand that states view liens in two very different ways. They're about 50-50, and we'll look at a couple of the states in the area. About half the states are called unpaid balance lien states, and the other half are called full amount lien states. The unpaid balance lien states limit the amount we can lien to whatever is unpaid on the general contract between the owner and the GC. So if it's $1 million contract and the owner has already paid $950,000 out to the GC, and we're due 200 grand down here as a material supplier, then we're going to, if we file a lien, it's only effective for the $50,000 that's remaining if it's an unpaid balance lien state. So we need to recognize unpaid balance lien states, we're probably going to file our lien a little sooner. Full amount states don't care. They put the onus on the owner. He can pay all $1 million out to the general contractor. We file a lien for a couple hundred grand. He has to make good on our lien as well. So we need to recognize what state is this? Is it unpaid or is it full amount? If it's unpaid, I'm probably going to react a little sooner. New York is the example we always use. You have 8 months from last furnishing in the state of New York to file your lien. Everybody thinks, wow, that's great. We have all sorts of time. Yeah, the problem is it's an unpaid balance lien state. So we may come along at 6 months and file our lien, but if all the money was paid out at 5 months, it's an empty lien and we don't have any real leverage. So we want to understand that. If you have the digest, this is the cheat sheet page out of the National Lien Digest. You can see Pennsylvania is a full balance lien state. New Jersey and New York are limited to unpaid balance states. So that's your cheat sheet to those of you that have that. Now, the last step is foreclosure, where we force the sale of the property. We have a deadline. We're going to let the owner know that, look, if we don't get paid, we're going ahead. We're going to file suit, and if you lose, you got to sell the property and pay us out of the proceeds. Most of the owners are not going to risk that. That's a pretty nice piece of leverage. And again, we're pulling something in. We're not suing the customer who may or may not have the assets to pay us if we get a judgment. This is a piece of property. That's plenty of assets to pay us out. It's a nice piece of leverage. Generally, they're not going to screw around and try and make this problem go away. Now, on the public side, we're not going to look to the mechanics lien statutes. We can't file liens against government-owned property. when it's owned by the federal, by the state, or by the municipal. So the government put some stuff in place for us. It said basically we're going to make sure there are bonds put in place by the general contractor for your benefit. They're going to give them to the owner, and if you are unpaid, you will look to that surety company to make sure you are made whole. These are guarantees provided by third parties like surety companies, who are very typically subsidiaries or divisions of insurance companies, and they're non-performance or non-payment, but it's put in place for our protection. And it was put in place back in 1935, actually. It started with the Federal Miller Act. And the Federal Miller Act is for all federal projects like HUD, Department of Defense, the Post Office, those things. Those are federally owned properties. And if it's federally owned, it falls under the Federal Miller Act. And the Federal Miller Act did two things. It established a threshold of dollars at which point in time a bond must be put in place. And the second thing it did was it outlined what we have to do and when we have to do it in the event we need a claim against that bond. Now, once that Federal Miller Act was in place, the states took a look and said, well, that's a pretty good idea. We should probably do the same thing for state projects and county projects. So the states adopted their own state bond claim acts, or Little Miller Acts, if you like. So if it's state, county, municipal, we're looking to the state bond claim statutes. If it's federal, we're looking to the Federal Miller Act. But we're going to go out in the bond claim filing process. The first step of the bond claim process is to get a copy of the bond. Why? Well, we want to make sure it's in place the way it's supposed to be. Now, we all know how that goes. Let's get a copy of the bond up front. So we ask the general contractor, is there a bond on this job, and may I have a copy? And what does the general contractor say? What? I'm sorry, bond? Can you tell me what that is? So sometimes they're difficult to get. Where can we get copies of these? Well, the general contractor is going to give it to the owner. The owner will have a copy. The GC may give us, but quite frankly, for the GC, there's no reason for them to give us a copy of the bond, because no good is going to come to them, only bad things. So the surety, if we know who they are. The architect is a very good resource. They usually, the general contractor will to the owner as well as the architect. So if we know the architect, they're a pretty good resource to give us a copy of the bond. Lien Finder is the database of all the liens and bond claims in the country. So you might want to search that. But those are some of the ways we can get that. But liens are available on private jobs too. All 50 states on the public side have statutes outlining bond claims statutes. And about half on private construction also have statutes requiring when bonds are required. But that's another reason we want to get a copy of the bond. One, we want to make sure it's in place the way the state says. The second reason we want to get a copy of the bond is, although the states have statutes telling us when a bond must be in place, not all of them outline what we have to do and when we have to do it in the claims process. On the public side, there's 13, I believe, that basically tell us if you need to claim against the bond, here's what you have to do. Get the bond and read it and do what it tells you to do. So we need to get that bond because it may tell us we have to serve a notice within 20 days of first furnishing, or we lose our right against that bond. So we want to get a copy of that bond. So if it's a public job, we're going to look to the statute. There will be a threshold that says there has to be a bond on this job. If it's private, we're going to look to the state and see, one, is there a statute requiring a bond on private jobs in that given state? If not, there still may be. It's entirely the prerogative of the owner to ask the general contractor for a bond. If I'm putting up a huge property, I'm going to make sure the general contractor gives me a performance and payment bond. If they fall down on the job and don't complete the work, I want something to go back to. So we have to ask the question. So on private jobs, there might be bonds also. Make sure we ask. Now, the last thing we'll talk about, it's available in a couple states in your area, not in Pennsylvania, but in New York and New Jersey. They have this, and it's called a public improvement lien. And basically what it is, you can see the states there that have this public improvement lien. It's called a stop notice in California. But essentially what it is it is a lien against unpaid funds on public projects. So if you're in New York and this is $1 million contract between the owner and the GC, and we're due $200,000 down here, we can actually file a lien, a public improvement lien, against the unpaid monies on this contract and the amount of money that the owner owes the general contractor. So we can actually crimp the cash flow to the GC. This is a very powerful piece of leverage to get. Now, obviously, the general contractors don't like this. But again, if we're getting nowhere, we can file a lien against this, against the unpaid the unpaid amounts, and it's a really powerful piece of leverage. So in Ohio, or I'm sorry, in New York and New Jersey, if you are running into that situation and you want help, give me a call and I will help you out. But again, pretty powerful piece of leverage to use. Pennsylvania does not have it. Now let's look at Pennsylvania. Right now, Pennsylvania's lien law tells us, here's what we have to do. There's no preliminary notice. This is the page out of the National Lien Digest too. So there's no notice required. Currently, what we have to do is we have to send a formal notice out at least 30 days before we file the lien, and we have to file a lien within 6 months from last furnishing. We have to sue within 2 years after filing the lien. And further, there's no provision requiring preliminary notice. Those contracting directly with the owner, the prime, or first-tier sub are the ones who have the rights. Waivers of lien rights. On commercial projects, we cannot waive our lien rights unless we've been paid in Pennsylvania. This was a big battle. Residentially, we can, though, waive our lien rights. So we can contractually waive our lien rights in Pennsylvania on residential projects. So we serve the formal notice upon the owner, 30 days to file the lien. We don't need to do this if we're direct with the owner, but if we're selling with a GC or a sub, again, 6 months from last furnishing is our deadline to file the lien, but at least 30 days in front of that, we have to send our formal notice to them. And the goal there is we serve the formal notice, letting them know that we're going to file the lien if this doesn't get resolved, and hopefully it lights a fire under the owner to resolve this issue. See NCS notes number 1, 2. See NCS notes number 1, we already looked. The lien is enforceable for the full amount owed, regardless of payments made by the owner. That's what the statute calls for now. There were changes put through, and the changes have been enacted into law already. They are waiting for the state of Pennsylvania to build a website that will function to facilitate the new changes that they have put in place. The law calls for the Department of General Services to create this website, and the website is going to be called the State Construction Notices Directory. And this notice of directory will call for projects over $1.5 million to be registered in this State Construction Notices Directory. If it's over $1.5 million, the phrase they're using is a searchable project. So if it's a searchable project, it's got to be registered in this. If it's a searchable project in this registry, you'll be able to go in there and search under the address of the project, the owner of the project, the contractor. Each project will be issued a unique identifying number. You'll be able to search under that unique identifying number as well. Now, the statute has said that the Department of General Services has to get this website built by the end of this year, 12/31/2016, or they have to provide adequate reasons why they were unable to get this completed. A couple states already have a registry like this. Utah has one, Iowa has one. This is a good idea to have this registry. I will caution you, though, that we've gone through this process with both states. When they roll this thing out, as with any new program or new software, what have you, there have been some, some speed bumps to get over. So when they roll this out, assuming it hits on the end of this year, January, February, yeah, have fun. It'll be a learning process where we'll all learn how this registry is going to work. Additionally, $1.5 million is a pretty high threshold. I don't know. I would imagine what their goal is to get the website up and running, and then once it is up and running, they would lower that threshold to cover more projects because, again, that's a pretty high threshold. So that's what the Construction Notices Directory is. Some of the changes, it will also add a notice of commencement. A notice of commencement is a very good thing. Notice of commencement, again, not many states. There are 7 right now that have this notice of commencement. But the notice of commencement is great because it provides all sorts of information that we need for that project. Like this, the name, location, and county in which the project is located. Legal description of the property, including the tax ID number, the name, address, and email address of the contractor. If it's bonded, the name and address and email address of the surety. So it has all of these things in it. That's very good information for us. So they're going to build this registry. We're going to go see what's out there. We can, request this notice of commencement from the owner, or go into the system and see it, and it should have all of the information that we would need to protect our lien rights. Those of you that sell in multiple states, you know this process of capturing the correct information is a battle in construction credit. Hopefully this registry will have all of the information that we need. So that's what the register, the notice of commencement, will do. It will give us all the information that we need. The law also creates a notice of furnishing, and this says we have to do our notice within 45 days after first furnishing. And the statute is very clear. If we do not do this notice in the time frame outlined, we forfeit our right to file our lien. The notice of furnishing is going to have a general description of the labor and the materials we furnished, the name and address of the person providing the materials, who are we, name and address of the person that we've contracted with, and a description of the project based on the notice of commencement too. So there's a way to match them up. So it also, it's going to require, the change will tell us also that contracts for a searchable project require language advising that the failure to comply with this results in you forfeiting your lien right. So if I'm a general contractor, I have to put that verbiage into my contract with my subcontractor, advising them that, look, here's what you got to do, and if you don't, you're going to lose your lien rights. So it adds this notice of furnishing. So we have this construction registry where all the information is going to be. There's going to be a notice of commencement to give us the information we need, and we have to do this notice of furnishing within 45 days after first furnishing material or job. It also adds a notice of completion. Now, the notice of completion, basically, the owner can file this notice of completion within 45 days of actual completion of the work. It's not required. They put it out there, though, as additional information to let us know that the project is completed. So again, it's not required, but they can serve that out there, and that helps us understand that, yeah, the whole thing is done. And then it also says we can do a notice of non-payment. The notice of non-payment is not required to protect our lien rights. It's informational only. So we're registering this in the construction notice registry, and basically it gives the owner more information. It lets them identify all of the people who have done this notice of non-payment, tells them, look, these are all the people who have not been paid and probably are going to be filing a lien here. So it helps them try and resolve the situation. So it's informational. Doing the notice of non-payment does not relieve us of having to do the other notices. If it's a searchable project over $1.5 million, we have to do our notice of furnishing within 45 days of first furnishing. Now, it also says, residentially go to unpaid balance too. So while Pennsylvania is a full amount state on commercial projects, residentially it will now be limited to the unpaid balance that the homeowner owes the prime contractor. So if you're residential, that's an effect for you too. Again, you might want to file liens sooner versus later. It also tells us, and this is good because really they're trying to prevent subcontractors and material suppliers from abuse. We'll see. Hopefully it changes behaviors, but it says the subcontract has to contain notice that failure by the subcontractor to timely file their notice of furnishing may result in forfeiture of their lien rights. It also says it's unlawful for any owner or general contractor to request or encouraging a subcontractor not to file his notice of furnishing. Now, I can tell you, we work in all 50 states and in all the provinces in Canada. This is really something else. because none of the other states have language like this that says, look, we want to stop the bickering, stop complaining about the notices. We're telling you, you have to put this verbiage in your contracts, and you cannot try and discourage them from protecting their lien rights, and you have to state it in the contract that they have to do their notice of furnishing to protect their lien rights. So a violation of this is going to be considered a second-degree misdemeanor. So the subcontractor can actually sue to recover actual damages. So the court may actually award, attorney's fees, costs, etc. So again, as you move across the states, most of the states have a notice requirement up front. Pennsylvania is now jumping into that area where 45 days from first furnishing, there is going to be this identifying of all of the people who have improved this property to the owner. And again, the goal is to preclude liens from being filed against the property by the owner being able to make sure that all of these people will get paid. So again, the first couple months, I'm sure there's, have patience. I'm sure there's going to be some issues with the website. I have not heard anything that tells me it's not going to be done by December 31st of 2016. Stay tuned, though. Stay tuned with the Federation. Stay tuned to NCS. We have a blog, and we put stuff out on LinkedIn and social media as to the updates of this. So you may want to plug in with us to stay abreast of what's going on. So here's, if private jobs, if FYI, if it's a public job, the bond claim statute, we get a copy of the bond, and we have to file our bond claim within 90 days from last furnishing. Once we've done that, we have to file suit within 1 year from last furnishing. So that's on the public side. That's just additional information. Doesn't have anything to do with the mechanics lien changes, but just know that is your time frame for what you have to do. So we've talked about 3 different things. We've talked about mechanics liens, we've talked about bond claims, and we've talked about public improvement liens. All 3 really great ways to protect ourselves. The changes in Pennsylvania lien law, and again, construction credit is a little different. That's why these tools were created, to help us protect ourselves. You folks are in it. This is a tough environment to get paid in. So those are some of the tools that you would use to protect yourself. So there's the topics we have covered. We will open it up now for questions.
All right, Joe, you ready for your first one?
Sure.
All right, can you clarify what happens if the project is less than 1.5 mil?
As of right now, if it's less than $1.5 million, it does not need to be registered in the state construction notice registry. And therefore, you won't have to do all these things that we looked at.
Great. Next question. If I don't do my notice in time, can I still file a lien?
In some states you can. If we're talking just about Pennsylvania, no. If you miss your notice deadline and you don't get it done within the 45 days after last furnishing in Pennsylvania, you've lost your right to file the lien. If we're talking across the country, by and large, if you miss your notice time frame, you have lost your right to file the lien. There are some states where you can save yourself, like Michigan and California come to mind, where you can serve a late notice to protect part of your rights. But generally, if you miss your preliminary notice deadline, you're done.
Are there payment bonds on private projects?
Yes, we kind of talked about that, but yes, there are. You have to ask the question. First of all, look to the state statute on the private job. If you need help with that, call us. We'll be able to help you in that given state. But look to the statute. The statute may require that a bond be posted on that project. If not, ask the question. Ask the owner, is there a bond on this job, and may I have a copy?
Great. At this time, there are no further questions. So with that, we are going to close today's webinar. I would like to thank you, Jerry, for taking the time to present to our group today, and thank all of today's attendees for taking the time out of their day to join us. Thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.